My name is Zeke. I'm a community member of Akash. I'm an Akash insider, which basically means I just kind of help a little more than you typically would be. So today I'm going to kind of just show you what Akash is, what it's about, and we'll go from there. And we'll have questions at the end. So this is Akash. This is our main website. Basically, what Akash is it's a decentralized compute marketplace on the Cosmos SDK. So basically what you can do is you can rent CPU, RAM, storage, and GPUs for very, very cheap compared to your typical data center like AWS or Google Cloud or something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of show you start to finish what it takes to deploy something, and then I'll show you some kind of cool things we can do with Akash, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So basically you can go to akash.network. It provides some pretty high level, what it can do, what it's built on. Get started, stuff like that. If you want more detailed stuff, we have a docs page, which goes into very, very detailed, architecture, how to deploy, how to run a Akash node, how to be a validator, stuff like that. And so that's a very good place to, if you want to start getting involved. I go to the docs page probably every day, just because it's so useful to reference it. So what we'll do is we're here, so we're going to deploy now. It's going to take us to CloudMos, which is it's basically just a user interface for deploying on Akash. So you can use Akash completely on just command line. You can download the software, deploy on the software, or deploy on the command line, everything. But for most people, it's just easier to use the user interface that's already built out for you. So you'll need AKT in your wallet. You can also use USDC now. It's just more expensive because the take rate's higher. So most people just use Akash. It's easier to. So what we can do here is we can just go hit deploy. It'll give us a bunch of templates. So you can either use a template, build off of a template, or you can, if you know SDL, which is Slack definition language, you can build off of it yourself. So we'll just do the hello world. And so it has a bunch of comments just kind of explaining what everything is. The basics of it is you have an image, which is a Docker image, a Docker file, and it has to be public right now. So you specify the image, you specify what ports you want to expose, because if you want to be able to access the deployment, you have to have ports to be able to go to it. And so you can reference any of those ports. You can even port map, so you're going to, in this case, we're exposing port 3000 as port 80. So 80 on the external, and it goes to port 3000 on the internal. And then global true, which actually exposes it to be accessed. Then you can specify what kind and how many resources you need. So CPU, we're going to use half of a core. How much memory, half of a gig, and then storage, half of a gig. And then pricing, so this is where if you were going to use USDC, you would change it from UAKT to USDC. And then, so that's kind of already built for us. We'll create deployment. It's going to make sure you have at least 5 AKT in your wallet. Once you have that, you'll hit continue. It will build a transaction for you, which basically just, it says, okay, I'm taking this 5 AKT, I'm putting it in an account, an escrow account, which it doesn't spend that 5 AKT, but it puts it in an account, and then on the provider side, it takes 5 AKT on that side too, and that kind of locks in the lease. So once you do that, now the 80 or so providers on the network all bid on your workload. So what we can see here is all these different validators. So we see anywhere from 46 cents a month to $6 a month. So me being, a user, I don't want to spend $6 a month for that little web page, especially when it's being offered for 46. And so what I can do here is I can see if they're audited, which is basically it's someone from the core team making sure your provider works as intended, making sure it's set up correctly. And so I'm going to want someone audited for this deployment, and I want someone with good uptime. So this has 100% uptime, and they're audited for 79 cents a month. So I'm going to select them. I'm going to accept their bid. It's going to now build a transaction for you to say, hey, I want this bid. So you're going to send it. It's going to send that transaction out. So now on the provider side, which is where I'm deploying the workload, it goes, hey, I won the bid. So great job for me. I won the bid. Now I'm going to build a pod, and I'm going to deploy on it. So it's now sending that SDL to that provider, and it's going to spin up. It's going to go boom. And so that's the events tab, basically saying, hey, I grabbed it, I created a pod for it, I sent the manifest to it. If we look at the logs, this is the logs of the provider, or of the actual pod. And then, let me talk about this page. So once you create a deployment on CloudMost, you have a couple pages. So you have your main kind of lease page, which shows, what it is, if it's ready, what provider, your cost, the resources you're using, and it gives you the URL of whatever you deployed. Your logs show what all has happened. Shell, this allows you to directly interface with the pod. So, if you want to directly interface with it, you can. And then again, the events. And then if you need to change your image, or you need to change an open port or something, you can do that without having to create a new deployment. But let's go here. We can go to this URL, and here's our web page we just deployed on some random, provider from, in this case, this guy is let's look at this provider details. So he's in Florida. So this provider is located in Florida. And so, yeah, that's it. Boom, we have now a website. What's up?
So can I log in into the container?
Yes, you can.
So can I use that for development before I put it in production?
Yes, you can.
Develop locally.
The issue is every time you restart the pod or redeploy, it doesn't save what was done in the container. So you would need to make the change on the Docker side, like the image side, and then redeploy probably. But you could mess with it in the container. If it changes, then great. Update the container on Docker and then redeploy it.
Yeah, so inside I can change my code for GPU, run it, and then save changes on GitHub, basically.
Yes, you should be able to do that, yes. Okay. And here's the great, go ahead.
What's time left around over 2 years?
Okay, so basically what this will do is it'll estimate based off of how much AKT, which in this case is 5, is locked up. If I didn't touch it, my 5 AKT would run out in over 2 years. So basically I just spent, at this point, it's like $4.50 a token. So for $20, I now have this web page for 2 years. It's great, and it's 79 cents a month. But what's up?
Where is the link or address how to log into the node?
So you can do it a couple ways. The easiest way would just be to go to Shell on this tab, and boom, you're in it. So I can do, let's just do CD, or, this is a pretty empty, it's just a hello world. But you can interface through it totally, right through here.
Can I SSH to it?
You can if you change so if we go into here and if we expose a port to port 22, then yes, you can SSH. You just have to make sure the
IP address?
So you can use, so every provider is using, so yes, it has its public IP address because that's where the server is located, but every provider has a DNS domain name with it. And so in this case, in this provider, it's provider.akash-palmento.org. And so you could you'd copy that, that's your host name, and then port 22, and that should give it to you. And then if you want to, you can always come in here, copy it, do, not that. Basically, you can resolve, we can go into here. If you need the IP, type in the, and that's the IP of the.
That's the IP of the whole provider.
Correct.
Not that specific Docker container.
Correct. So you would do that. So that's when you would expose the port. So let's say we used port 5000 on the external, map to that to port 22 on the internal. Whenever you would do SSH into port 5000, the reverse proxy would know that goes to that pod. So the provider pod does that. It maps that all for you.
And I do that in the Docker container.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
So we'll go back to home. We'll see our one deployment. We'll hit our active deployments. We'll go to it. So one of the great things about Akash is yes, it costs 79 cents a month, but I'm done with it. So do I have to pay the 79 cents? No. We can just come here, we can close the deployment. It'll now send a transaction saying, hey, I've closed the deployment. I want my whatever of my 5 AKT isn't spent back. So in this case, it'll be 4.9992 or whatever. And so instead of spending the 79 cents I have to, I now spent less than a cent for whatever time I used it for. So that's one of the things you can do. Something that I personally, so I run a validator for Akash, but instead of hosting the validator, in some data center or whatever, I host it on the Akash Network. And so if for some reason I need to, like it goes down or whatever, I don't have to go physically to that location or whatever. I can just redeploy it on the Akash Network. I have basically 100% uptime. Just if it goes down, however much time it takes for me to redeploy the container, I'm done. And so there's some preset, templates for this. So in this case, this is Akash. This is a preset for an Akash node. And so we can just create deployment, do the 5 AKT, approve, and then at this point, it's being broadcasted to the blockchain saying, hey, I need, I think it's 4 CPU, 8 gigs of memory, 100 gigs of storage, and then all the providers go, okay, it's going to cost this much. They spit it back over the network, and I'm anywhere from $8.62 to $85. And so let's say we pick the provider that I personally run because I like that provider. What's up?
What kind of guarantees do I get as a bidder, as a user, from the provider?
What do you mean?
Like I know, for example, like a lot of decentralized AI protocols, there's a lot of issues with am I actually getting ChatGPT 4 versus 3, right? Because it's a lot cheaper.
So the guarantee behind it is you choose what you deploy.
Right, but how do I know that they are deploying exactly what I'm giving them, even if it's a Docker container?
Because it's not a manual process. So like whenever you specify the Docker container, it downloads that Docker container no matter what. So there's no ability for it to change what Docker container it's actually going to download.
Because the Akash client enforces.
Correct. So there's no, if like on my provider, I can't log in to it, go, oh, you want to use this. I can't go in and change what Docker image you're pulling at all.
Would it be possible for someone to run a modified Akash client though? That are there any guarantees that I get from a?
So one of the things is there's the ability to get audited. So in this, a third party will say, okay, you're running the correct, like your provider's working, it's running how it's supposed to be, stuff like that. So if you're running, and you can see some providers aren't audited, some providers are audited. And you can specify, hey, I only want audited providers to bid on this. Or whenever you're looking at what to deploy, it will say either yes, it's audited, or no, it's not. So that's probably your best way of getting a guarantee that it's not happening.
The auditing process?
So to get audited by Overclocked Lab, you have to create a GitHub, like a GitHub discussion, say, hey, here's my provider, I want to be audited. And then someone from the core team will go review your provider, make sure it all works. There's currently a proposal just passed for a couple of community members that are actually building a third-party auditing service. So they'll be able to go in and do much more tedious auditing. So they'll be like, so instead of what's your uptime over this week, what's your uptime over a month? Or are you actually providing this, or is it actually like, you say your internet can do gig symmetrical, why is it only doing 400 or whatever? So that's in the works now, and that's going to be a lot more of like a rigorous process to get audited by them. So yeah.
Do you don't have storage, right?
We don't have what?
Storage.
We do have storage. Yep. So.
Like if the Docker container shuts down, can you get stuff from the storage?
Yes. So, and there's actually two types of storage. So there's, I forget how to pronounce it, it's like epidermal or something like that, which basically every time the pod restarts, that gets wiped. but you can also attach what's called persistent storage, which every time the pod reboots, that storage stays. And so in that persistent storage, you can actually specify if you want hard drive storage, SSD storage, or NVMe storage. So if you need really, really fast storage to pull from, you can ask for NVMe storage, but it's going to cost more. But if you have a deployment that isn't really reliant on speed, you can go, hey, I'll take a hard drive, and it's going to be cheaper than it would be for an NVMe drive.
And the other thing, what about static IP addresses?
So that is an ability. So certain providers offer the ability for you to lease a static IP, like only you can use it too. So I know one of the big providers, Europlots, has that. I think he has like 30 IPs in total. So that allows for multiple people to use a different static IP. And what the Akash client will do is it'll map this public IP goes to this pod, and by doing that you can open every port. So you could do 22 to 22 and do it that way. So, so we just deployed that node a couple minutes ago. Let's see how it's doing. So yeah, it's already running. It's grabbing the state sync. So here in a couple minutes, it'll be rocking and being a node. So another thing that you can do, it's kind of a more recent add, is Akash now supports GPUs. And so that's a big thing with AI, GPUs doing the workloads. And so one of the things that you can do, and this is completely hosted on Akash, is this website, this front end's on Akash, and then what it does is basically you put in what you want to do, you hit generate, it then sends it onto the back end of Akash to an actual provider and runs it. So in this case, the prompt is a futuristic city with neon lights, raining, streets, bright colors, and detailed. We can choose from a bunch of different samplers. Let's just pick this one. We'll hit generate image. It does that. It says, boom, I found a GPU provider, Foundry staking with an NVIDIA A100. So it's now deployed that. Boom, image generated. What?
Where do you pick the model?
So this is just an example. So in this case, it's SDLX or X. But if you wanted to, and we'll go to that in a second, you can choose different models and deploy different models. And so you can choose whatever you want. So like a banana with sun glasses giving a thumbs up, if I can spell. Giving banana thumbs up. We can change the sampler. We'll generate the image. So the sampler is basically how it does the processing. And then boom, there you go. There's your banana with doing that. And so it's just one example of it. And so let's see here. So yeah, we can see our node's running perfectly now. Let's say I'm done with the node, and you can see how much you've spent even, and which in this case it's 0.000216 AKT, which is less than a cent. So we're done with, actually we'll just leave it running. So now we're going to deploy. We're going to go to search marketplace, and this is a massive amount of pre-built SDLs that you can choose from. In this case, we'll do GPU, and then we can do, what does this use? Yeah, we can deploy this one. So we'll deploy this one. It says, hey, I needed one CPU, 30 gigs of memory, one GPU, and 100 gigs of storage. We'll create deployment. We'll continue. We'll approve. So yeah, a couple big things about Akash is, number one, it's way cheaper than like using Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud. Like if you wanted to, I mean, we can look at it now real time, but it's about 70 to 80% cheaper to deploy on Akash than it would be to deploy on a typical data center. So we've deployed. We can pick what kind of GPU we want. So here's all the different providers saying, hey, I have this type of GPU. In this case, why not use a V100? So we'll use the V100, we'll accept the bid, we'll approve it, and we'll let this deploy. on the network. Is there any more questions while we wait for this to deploy?
How do you plan to keep the prices low?
So you,
Or like why would they stay low?
so you keep them low for a couple reasons. Number one, when demand's high, prices typically go up, but in this case, there's a lot of providers too, so the supply is high. So the providers kind of have to fight against each other in a sense to keep their prices low. And what's up?
Are there a lot of providers where the energy is cheap?
So yes and no, it kind of depends. So some providers that are more expensive probably are more expensive because their energy costs are higher. But as an end user, it really doesn't matter to you. You're paying the price. The provider on the backside, it's like I own a provider, right? I have to price my provider based off of what it's going to cost me to run my provider. So my electric's like 12 cents a kilowatt. And so because of that, I know my provider, typically does X amount of kilowatts a month. So I need to be pricing my, compute based off of that. And, that's my job as a provider. As an end user, you see it and go, oh, it costs this much a month.
Are there any discounts if you keep the node running for like a month or a year?
So one thing you could do is if you're in the Discord and you are saying, hey, I'm looking at a deployment that's going to last 6 months. As a provider, that's like, hey, that's guaranteed 6 months income. I could offer you a lower price, basically saying I'm guaranteed this much money, and I can actually go into my price script when my provider calculates the price. I can put your wallet address and say, hey, I'm going to charge this guy this much, and so you have your own price versus anyone else deploying has my typical prices.
And that's done through Discord.
Discord, yeah. There's also a website, depending on what you're doing, is Akash ML. Do you know the
Akash ML.
.network?
I think.
Nope. Oh, I spelled Akash wrong. ML. I don't know.
It might be .com.
It might be .com.
Yeah.
Akash ML. There we go. So Akash ML. So this is kind of, if you're wanting to do long-term deployments, this would be kind of a good place to go. So what this does is it fills out a form, and you can say, hey, I'm looking for this GPU on this time frame. That then goes to the core team. The core team can then go, hey, I know this provider has these type of GPUs. I'm going to contact them directly. They're going to say, hey, this is my best price. They'll get back to you, and then they'll work that out.
Why is it done by humans, not just like...
Yet. But in terms of typical pricing, that's all done automatically through a script. But again, if you were going to do a long-term deployment, I would lower my prices for that. And that doesn't take very long at all. So let's see how this is going. Looks like it's still deploying.
Is there a quick way to see like lowest price for configuration? Or,
To do so what you could do is, like, let's say you're wanting to launch, I don't know, let's do WordPress, for example, right? And we want, well, really, if you just want a price on what type of resources, just do the hello world. How many do you want? How many CPU cores do you need? Just give me a number.
well,
16? Okay. How many gigs of memory do you need? 32 gigs. And how much storage do you need? So we can do this. We can create a deployment. All this is going to cost us is the 0.00313 AKT to generate the transaction. So what this is going to do is it's going to broadcast to the blockchain, hey, I need 16 CPU cores, 32 gigs of RAM, 32 gigs of memory. All the providers that have that amount of available resources are going to broadcast back saying, hey, I have this available resources. So that's your price, $16.52. Or if you want a different provider, 24. If you want an audited provider, $24.96 a month.
and
But then instead of having to deploy, you can just come here, you can close the deployment. So now you know how much that costs. And
what if I want I don't know how you measure how many cores.
So cores is done by, it's basically how many threads. So if I have a 32 core CPU.
Threads right now and like 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's different. So one thing you can do is inside, so every provider has attributes. And part of the whole, like what CPU am I renting and what speed of RAM am I renting is part of that new auditing group, is when they audit you, that's going to become public information that's real time, what type of CPU you have, what type of RAM you have. But like let's say you go to Europlots. So this is someone's provider. He has DDR4 RAM, he's running an AMD CPU, and he's running an NVIDIA 3090. It doesn't say what type exactly. And so that's one thing that we're fixing with this auditing group. But you could also create a simple deployment and say, hey, run a code that spits out what type of CPU it is to know what type of CPU it is.
Right now it's just cheaper to use old processors and run slower CPUs.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And part of that's reflected in the price. So if you have a provider with slower CPUs, their prices are probably cheaper.
But I cannot tell.
You would have to do a test deployment, correct?
And do you have an option to run it on hardware, like on metal, without virtualization?
No.
Okay.
Because everything is a Docker container in a Kubernetes pod.
It could be Docker container, but
But it's in a K8 cluster.
the whole machine.
It's in a Kubernetes cluster.
Okay.
So here, I can actually show you what it looks like from a provider side. VPN.
One thing to note too is if anyone's participating as members hackathon, and I know you are, we can throw you guys 5 AKT if you're looking to build something on a hackathon. So if you're interested, just grab us and we can throw 5 AKT. You don't need a keyboard wallet for that.
So I'm directly SSH'd into my provider, and so if I'm running a command to show every pod that's running on the Kubernetes cluster. So this is everything that's currently running. So anything that's Akash services is Akash's software, basically backend. So I have a node running, the provider pod running, the host name running, then the inventory operator, which basically says, hey, I actually have this much of this, and that spits it all to the provider pod. The provider pod then uses the node to broadcast that to the network. And then a bunch of cube system, that's the backend of the cube. And then all these with these random namespaces are all actual deployments that are running on said provider. So again, it's the entire backend of Akash is built on Kubernetes.
So one of my use cases having a dev box on the cloud. The network is just fast, especially for hackathons.
Yep.
If I post in the Discord channel asking who has like the most recent CPU or the fastest one, can I get that information?
Yeah.
Anyway? Or like is there like a website where they providers can list what CPUs they?
So.
For me, compile time is the most
Correct.
important thing.
Correct. And that's part of what's being solved in this new auditing proposal and what they're building is to fix that issue. Because if you're needing super fast compile times and fast RAM, you need to know that before you go and spend money basically. And so
Right now there's no solution.
So you can't if you post in the Discord, there's a provider channel, say, hey, I'm looking for what kind, like who has a really fast CPU, and providers will eat that up because again, it's their business. So if they have a fast CPU, they're inclined to go, hey, I have a really fast CPU, here's my provider, done. And so there's a couple providers specifically. I know Europlots, he has a really high-end EPYC processor. I just know that by memory. But you could go in the Discord and say, hey, I need a really fast CPU, who has one, and then pretty shortly someone will reach out. So at the end of the day, for a provider, that's how they make money. So they're inclined to be active in the Discord to go, hey, I have that. But yeah, so it's not bare metal, but it is run on a Kubernetes cluster. So, any other questions? But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is if you have more questions, join the Discord. It's a very active Discord. There's kind of two groups of special people, so to speak. So you have insiders, which are just community members that want to have to do more with the project and spend more time with it. And then you also have vanguards, which are a level higher, and those are basically guaranteed, hey, they have to be in the Discord X amount of hours a week or a day. And so you'll get your question answered very, very quickly. So if you have more questions or anything, scan this QR code. It will send you to a little type form to get your questions answered. And then if you're looking to deploy on Akash and you need some test AKT, this will also help us get in touch with you so we can send you a little something for you to mess around with it before you spend your own money. And then yeah, Akash.network, aka ASH.network. Website has links to X, Discord, and then CloudMost too, and the docs. It's a great website. And so, but yeah, if there's no other questions, then thanks everybody.